2, 3, go.
You're listening to The Sustainable Angler, and my daddy is the host.
All right. Thanks to my daughter for the cutest intro ever, and thanks for listening to the Sustainable Angler podcast, which, if you're new here, is a show created to inspire anglers to protect the planet, and I'm your host, Rick Crawford. So if you've been paying attention to recent headlines, you know that we're experiencing record heat both on land and in our rivers and oceans. For example, the week of the 4th of July was the hottest week ever recorded. And in Florida, record water temps are causing coral bleaching. That's why I'm excited to share this interview with Dr. Aaron Adams, who is the Director of Science and Conservation with Bonefish Tarpon Trust. And we talk about everything from how climate change is impacting tarpon, bonefish, permit, and redfish, how climate change is exacerbating the effects of El Nino, and tips on how to be a more responsible angler and getting involved with our fisheries management. The Sustainable Angler is available anywhere you listen to podcasts and also airing on Saturdays at 2 p.m. on Charleston's only nonprofit independent community radio station, Ohm Radio 96.3 FM. I hope you enjoy, and if you like what you're hearing, it'd be great if you could leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. This episode of the Sustainable Angler podcast is brought to you by Emerger Strategies, a sustainable business consultancy dedicated to measuring and improving your company's sustainability performance, all while boosting profits. To learn more, visit www.emergerstrategies.com. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in and listening to the Sustainable Angler podcast. Today, I have Dr. Aaron Adams from Bonefish and Tarpon Trust. And rather than me try and fumble through his credentials, I'll let Aaron introduce himself, and we'll dive into the interview.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rick, for having me on the podcast. I'm Aaron Adams. I'm the Director of Science and Conservation for Bonefish Tarpon Trust. I've been doing fish research in the Caribbean, Western Hemisphere, I'd say, for the past 30 years or so. All of it focused on conservation applications. And so my background, it matches well with Bonefish Tarpon Trust mission, which is to understand enough about our species, their habitats, so that we can work with the fishing community, resource managers, other researchers to fill knowledge gaps and address conservation needs. So really big ones, of course, are habitat and water quality, right? If the fish don't have healthy habitats and water quality, then it's, management of, say, catch and harvest, that doesn't really matter, right? They need good ecosystems. And climate change is a big part of that, for sure. There's a lot of interactions. In general, places that have healthy habitats and good water quality are much more resilient to things like climate change. You're much more likely to have systems that can adapt to some extent. But when you have weakened systems, due to poor habitat or loss of habitat or bad water quality, that's when you start to see climate change, which is already a big problem, exacerbated even more.
Well, so currently I'm relatively new to the tarpon game, you could say. And over the last couple of years have really just gotten probably unhealthily obsessed with them. And I'll say that I was fishing recently. I'll say the state, but I will not give the location. But in an undisclosed location in North Carolina, I went tarpon fishing, and they were abundant, which was surprising to me. I knew through BTT, I did not know this until y'all had the research to brought sort of the science to it of saying, hey, these fish are going north. And I guess I had always, I grew up in Savannah, I live in Charleston, and I'd always heard that, there's some tarpon around and you might be able to find them. But I was shocked by the numbers, and I didn't know if, and it might not, but I didn't know if climate change may have anything to do with that.
I think it does as far as abundance. So if you look at historical records, tarpon have always migrated farther north than a lot of people might realize. Chesapeake Bay, mouth of the Chesapeake Bay area, for example. There's accounts from back in the 50s that I'm aware of people catching tarpon. And maybe starting in the 60s, people actually targeting tarpon up there. Dirty waters, not much sight fishing, and not catching a ton of fish. But yeah, with bait, people were figuring that out. That's become more so in recent years. I found some old photographs many years ago of a couple people with tarpon they had speared off the coast of Portugal. So if you think about the Gulf Stream, right, the one reason that Western Europe doesn't freeze like the eastern side is because the warm waters of the Gulf Stream. South coast of England, you can find places that have palm trees, for example. Tarpon have the ability to do that, but I don't think it was as common before.
Yeah.
Just in my time and talking to others, I think that the season that tarpon, the duration of the season that tarpon spend north, say North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, is longer than it used to be. Historically, the fishery up there was mostly in the late summer, early fall, August, September, especially when the southward migration of all the bait fish, menhaden and mullet, and the tarpon would follow that. And some of those, stories of those migrations are legend, right? The amount of fish along the beaches and whatnot.
Yeah.
Since then, many decades ago, the timing of tarpon arriving in places like Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina is earlier than it used to be. So you're talking about growing up, in the South Carolina coast. You were right. They caught some. Some people knew about it. Mostly it was late summer.
Right.
But now people are expecting to see fish in early June, June 1st.
Yep.
And you've also seen, I have a lot of experience in Southwest Florida over the past 20 some years. If say 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you really didn't see an abundance of tarpon until late May, mid to late May. Now you can find tarpon in early April.
Wow.
Right. So those kind of more northern than the Keys seasons are happening earlier. And I think the migrations north are happening earlier. And then overall migrations seem to be holding the same spatial pattern, but we're also getting every year now we're getting a report or two of an angler off the New Jersey coast getting tarpon, or even spear fishermen getting tarpon from some of the artificial reefs up there. So
are people spear fishing tarpon?
Yeah. Somebody sent me a Instagram photo the other day on that.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So the next step for us, given the climate change influence on tarpon movements and the data that we continue to gather, we'll soon be putting out some education stuff, but also a call to the states all along the eastern seaboard to enact basically Florida's tarpon regulation, which is catch and release only. Can't take them out of the water, that type of thing.
Which through BTT they did in North Carolina, I believe. That's catch and release now only.
Correct. And we actually had a couple pictures of people dragging tarpon up on the beach there, and they may have eventually released them, but the data are very clear that if you take a tarpon more than 40 inches long out of the water, you're greatly increasing the chances it's going to die.
I mean, that's 100. So, right. It's about 100 million-year-old fish. Like these fish have survived since the dinosaurs, and someone to I guess they're just uneducated about what can happen to them, maybe, and hopefully this podcast will shed some light on that. But the proper handling of these fish is critical.
And that handling, keeping them in the water, keeping fight time short, breaking the fish off if shark shows up, those become even more important as the water gets warm during the summer. Because although tarpon are a tropical and subtropical fish, they all fish have their maximum minimum temperatures they can handle. And as the water temperatures get warmer during the summer, like especially this summer, then tarpon are even more prone to exhaustion during the fight, and then pulling them out of the water just adds to that.
All right, so I want to get to water temperature in a minute, because that's like, it's crazy high right now. We'll talk about that in a second. But we talked about tarpon. What are some of the impacts of, maybe it impacts them all, but of bonefish and permit as well, for basically flat species? How is climate change, I guess, negatively impacting those flat species?
Well, we can use bonefish as one example. The water temperature can definitely get too hot for them on the flats. So, for example, we don't tag, if we're doing a tagging study, we don't tag bonefish during the summer because it's just too hot for, to surround them with a net and then handle them for the tagging, all that type of stuff. So we limit our tagging basically from October till April, because of water temperature issues. Water temperature on the flats can get too hot for bonefish, and so they'll just kind of move into deeper water and hold in deeper water. Especially if you have, say, a low tide during the middle of the day, the water that's on the flats on a sunny day is just going to get super heated. And so you'll find bonefish kind of just riding with the incoming water, deeper water coming in, which would be a bit cooler. But there are times now when you might expect to see bonefish on a rising tide way up in the backcountry, that in July and August, you're not going to see them because it's just too hot. And those types of days where it does get too hot are more frequent now than they used to be. So bonefish can definitely be affected by it. Permit can as well, but of the three species, they seem to be most tolerant of warmer temperatures. So that not as big of a problem. We have not looked at the effective temperature on permit catch and release, but under what we'll call normal circumstances, catch and release of permit, their survival is extremely high. We don't see much physiological effect on them, and we also don't see a whole lot of predation by sharks after they're released if you're on the flats. Tarpon, similar to bonefish, could definitely get too warm for them. So when, for example, we were doing our acoustic tagging studies of tarpon, we didn't tag during the summers because the water just got too warm for them. And when we're doing that tagging, it requires a good bit of handling. We keep them in the water, but still we have to handle them a lot. And if it was warm and that stress, it was just too much for them. So if you're fishing for them during the heat of summer, like now, July, August, when it's super hot, and say in the Florida Keys, morning's probably better because it's cooler. Shorter fight times, or even, a lot of people are using fly fishing anyway, or using mosquito hooks, which are pretty light wire, so they can hook the fish, get some jumps, and then they can straighten the hook. And so that's better for the fish. They get the fun part of anglers get the fun part of the experience. The
highly addictive part of watching a tarpon break the surface. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, a silver dinosaur, flying through the air. Pretty crazy.
It's pretty awesome. Well, speaking of, awesome and wanting to, protect species that you love. So I'm in Charleston. Is there any evidence of that BTT knows of or research I've done on redfish, and some of these impacts. I don't know if it's they seem pretty. You can catch redfish from Texas up to Virginia ish. They seem pretty resilient to heat just based on where they live, but I don't know. I don't know if climate impacts them.
Yeah, even redfish, from my experience in Florida, it can get warm enough during summers that even redfish can have trouble.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, part of it's the heat, and of course they're cold-blooded, so it affects their metabolism. But also warm water holds less oxygen in general.
Yeah.
And so that also becomes a challenge. So like in summer, for redfish, I'm typically fishing early in the day or, kind of around if you get dusk, low tide for tailors.
Yeah.
Things have cooled off a good bit. And even then, a little bit, heavier class tippet and getting them in quickly and getting them out quickly as well.
Yeah.
That also means, less time for photos, which a lot of people don't like to hear in this age of Instagram.
Right.
Or
the grip and grin,
I like to call it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I understand the desire for pictures, but if we're killing the fish that we're out there chasing, or in the case of guides, depending on us for a livelihood,
yeah,
we've got to keep that stuff in mind. And summer is definitely more stressful for pretty much all of them. So yeah, it's again, water doesn't get as hot, say up in Virginia, where you can find them in the grass beds up there. But in Florida, especially this year, it could get too warm for them in the summer.
Interesting. Well, I'm gonna not necessarily shift gears, but I'm gonna read some headlines from this month of articles that I've come across, because Aaron, I ran into you at ICAST and we kind of had a little bit of a brief discussion about this. But just I was like, God, I mean, and ICAST was, mid-July, basically, for anyone listening to this. So we're in July, it's 2023, and the headlines are reading something like this. Record temperatures along the Florida coast threaten severe coral bleaching. Global ocean roiled by marine heat waves, with more on the way. Last week was the hottest ever recorded. Here's why we keep smashing records. And when you and I spoke, you had mentioned we're in an El Nino, right? And it's climate change, which is kind of a perfect storm for this warm weather. But rather than me try and butcher that, I'll let the scientists elaborate on that. But is that true? I mean, I guess is that what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's unprecedented, global temperatures for sure. El Nino and La Nina, and then other oceanic oscillations, are natural phenomena. But those phenomena are the differences between the extremes of those phenomena are exacerbated by climate change. Right. So the system overall, the global system of, we'll call it checks and balances, which have just kind of inherently been keeping, the earth livable for us. Climate change is affecting that, making it more variable, less predictable, and prone to more extremes. So, for example, for the La Nina, Australia typically is wetter than it normally is. But the last La Nina was so strong, you may have been watching the news over the past few years, Australia had just epic flooding.
Yep.
Now that El Nino has set in, it's usually drier there. But talking to colleagues over there, they're already seeing close to unprecedented drought. Their meteorological service has classified this El Nino that's starting now as potentially the worst on record. They've got a lot of brush that grew from all the rains from La Nina that they're afraid is drying out, just like we're seeing in California now, right? So you get the pendulum swings somewhat unpredictably, but also farther, more extreme. So, Yeah, El Nino is exacerbating what we're seeing with temperatures and some of our weather. Um, but it's being made more extreme by climate change. I mean, here's another example for you. Typically, an El Nino year means fewer hurricanes in the Atlantic.
Okay.
And that's because the upper level wind shear just blows the tops off the storms, and they can't really form, or if they do form, they can't last very long. All NOAA, University of Colorado, and skipping on the third entity, have all predicted now more than average number of hurricanes in the Atlantic basin. There's never been that prediction before. In El Nino year, there's never been at or above average number of hurricanes. But they basically, what they're saying is that the sea surface temperatures are so high throughout the Atlantic, and even the temperatures at depth in places like the Caribbean are so warm that they expect the old rules to not be as applicable.
Wow.
Right. So that's pretty massive, right?
Yeah.
That's a prediction. But the fact that all the data that they have, they're making those predictions is pretty telling, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was reading somewhere about this, but I guess for everyone's general knowledge, the ocean absorbs like 90% of, or I don't know what the percentage is. It's a high percentage of the heat, right? That otherwise we would be feeling on land because of climate change, because we're burning fossil fuels. It's staying trapped in our atmosphere, which are greenhouse gases, and it's warming our planet. Well, the ocean absorbs most of that heat. And so now we're getting it. It almost seems like it's like a pot on the stove that's getting warmer and warmer every year, and then you have this El Nino that kicks it into high, and it's almost like it's almost ready to come to a boil. I mean, it's just crazy everything that I'm hearing with water temperature.
Yeah, so the ocean was absorbing a lot of that extra heat, but it has a capacity, right? It can't absorb it forever. One thing that people don't typically understand is that in the world of what we'll call the natural world, ecology, for example, or systems like this, is people kind of expect these like long-term trends. But what typically happens is systems will be able to absorb things like temperature, or if it's a fishery, they'll be able to absorb a certain amount of fishing, and everything looks fine. But then all of a sudden you kind of you'll hear people talk about a tipping point, or a threshold, right, where just the bottom drops out, and all of a sudden things change quickly. So that perception of kind of a long-term gradual change and et cetera, is a misperception.
Uh-huh.
So in the scientific world, that's kind of that's just known. That's just the world that we deal in. But trying to translate that into outside of the scientific world to people who aren't scientists, has obviously been a challenge.
Yep.
So yeah, everything that's happening has been predicted, and some of it has been predicted with incredible precision. I think some people, scientists included, are maybe surprised by it happening sooner than they had predicted.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't really predict thresholds, right? You can't really predict what's going to be that final straw that breaks the camel's back type of thing.
Right.
So we're in that point, and the big question is, let's say, typically El Nino lasts for a few years. Let's say in a different scenario, it just ends next year. Will our overall system, rebound and kind of get back to lower temperatures? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. It's kind of
pretty terrifying.
Yeah, it's new normal, right?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, it's sobering, right, to hear this, but I need, like, I don't think people are grasping the sense of urgency of this is immediate action needs to be taken on all fronts. Anything and everything. I think it's all hands on deck at this point. I mean,
yeah, I mean, 100%. So there's a lot of different levels. On the personal level, we can use some of the trout fisheries out west as an example of water. Guides and anglers, in addition to the states, keep track of water temperature. And if it gets too warm, some people just stop fishing certain areas.
Yeah.
Or if they fish, they'll only fish, early in the morning, type of thing, which sucks for the guides because that's their livelihood.
Yeah.
So there's, that type of thing at the personal level. And the same thing can happen, say in Florida, the Florida Keys getting temperatures, water temperature, 96 degrees in some places.
How does that compare to like an average or?
Oh, it's well above average.
Yeah.
And it's way too much for fish. So, a responsible angler, will be checking the water temperature and not fishing places. So there's some of that self-regulation that can happen.
So that's kind of our new normal is you're going to need to be checking water temperatures where you're fishing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, for sure. I think also, so self-regulation is a big one. But, getting to the bigger picture, in a democracy like ours, and we kind of get the leaders that we deserve because we vote them into office.
Right.
And so not enough people, citizens, voters in the United States have made climate change a big enough issue to make things happen. And we're seeing the repercussions of that now, and those repercussions are going to continue to ramp up. So like when I give talks at say fishing clubs and get questions about what can we do, very frequently my response is look in the mirror.
Right.
Right, we're the ones. And until the politicians think they're going to get defeated in an election because of something like this, they're not going to act on it.
Yeah.
But I would guess that every person, every fisherman every angler listening to your podcast will have been affected by climate change. If they're, say trout fishing out west, last year, there were some areas that were closed down.
Yeah.
Part of the year, right? For the water's too warm. If they live in places like North and South Carolina, they're seeing more tarpon than they used to, which, right, can be a positive, but it's also a result of climate change.
Right.
If they're in, say, South Florida, where the water temperature is super hot right now, then that's a negative impact. So everybody's getting affected by it. And the thing is that, a person might think that, this is a great positive change of catching more tarpon in North Carolina. But there's also going to be some bad aspects too that they really don't want to deal with, like some of the coastal flooding they've already had, more intense hurricanes, which they've already had, sea level rise, which they've already had, right? There's some places in North Carolina along the Barrier Island that are getting swept away by the ocean.
Yeah.
All those are interconnected.
And I mean, we see it here in Charleston. I mean, there's sunny day flooding. I mean, there's no rain, and the tides are big enough that downtown Charleston, the streets are flooding during a no rain event, just a big tide.
Right.
And we're seeing that a lot more here. And another thing too that I don't think that a lot of people realize is, like, with all the development and everything going on, you talk about water quality, and it's like if you're having more rain and you're having more storms and you're developing areas where there's not a natural buffer to absorb some of that, the runoff is going straight right there into your estuaries where there's juvenile fish who are now living in substandard water quality, right? And that's going to have impacts later down the road if they survive at all.
Yeah, that's what I was referencing, when we first started talking, is that systems with healthy habitats and good water quality are going to be better able to some extent, absorb some of the impacts of climate change. But when you take a watershed and you develop it so it becomes impervious surface, that increases runoff.
Yeah.
which it comes with poor water quality. Often, especially in the summer, that water is heated from being over concrete or blacktop. So yeah, you're basically you're compounding all those types of things. And with the some of the maps I've seen of the planned development for the low country area, and the watersheds above all the wetlands, that problem is only going to get worse. So these are the kind of things that BTT is constantly working on, is trying to first understand, but then when we understand, trying to influence policy to keep these systems from becoming more broken, so that they're actually functioning, even with things like climate change.
And one of the things that I personally love about Bonefish Tarpon Trials, and why I support the work that y'all do, which I think is so important, is, and I think it's maybe one of y'all's taglines or something, but it's bringing science to the fight. And I think that's so important, that it's not just hey, we think that this would be best. It's like, well, and here's the data to back it up, and this is what's happening, and it's really powerful when it's backed by science, and it's kind of becomes irrefutable. And unless you just don't believe in the data, but the data is the data.
Yeah, and when we go into very briefly, our process is, well, it's integrated, for one, right? It involves anglers, it involves other researchers, and it involves resource managers. And with those different entities, those groups, we figure out the status of knowledge for the species that we work on. We figure out the conservation threats, and we figure out management needs or gaps. And we use that information to prioritize what research we're going to fund. Once we get the research data back, then that informs us of how it can be applied. Mm-hmm. Right? So we don't go into a thing saying, oh, we think this should happen, we're going to go do some science to support that. We don't know what the answer is till we do the science.
Right.
But once we get the science, we get the data, then we work with those same three entities, those same three groups, to formulate proposals on how we're going to apply that information. And so that's how we get things like, protected areas in the Bahamas for bonefish spawning locations and home ranges, or how we get that spawning season closure for Western dry rocks and the Keys, or how we provide support to efforts in North Carolina to make tarpon catch and release. All those types of things, right, are informed by the science. If we didn't have the science, we can't really form an opinion or have a formal statement, because we don't have the data to back it up.
Yep.
So yeah, we don't show up at the table really as far as policy goes until we're comfortable with the level of information that we've got. Mm-hmm. So when BTT comes up and says things like, look, coastal habitat development is going to significantly damage our fisheries, it's not based on just opinion. There's a lot of information on that.
Right.
The fact that we've got information on tarpon migrations, that the same fish or follow the same patterns, shows the connectivity, and really underscores that we need regional management. It can't just be, state by state.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, that seems, especially now with climate change, and some fish are changing migratory patterns. I mean, we're having less freezes in South Carolina, so there's more snook. And but snook isn't regulated in South Carolina. I mean. Or if it is, I don't know about it, but
it's not.
Yeah. And so I was like, well, hang on. But my point is that, with a regional management from a fisheries management perspective, and including climate in that discussion, it seems that's going to be more important than ever. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of unregulated fish that are in different states, because they're just following the difference in water temperature. I assume.
Yeah. So, with snook, good example. It wasn't that long ago that their northern end of their range, as far as like a spawning population, was Tampa. But now there's, spawning population way up in kind of the Big Bend area of Florida on the Gulf Coast.
Wow.
We get juvenile tarpon have always because of larval transport from spawning, people talk about juvenile tarpon and say the northern Gulf of Mexico or even South Carolina. But now with not getting those freezes during the winter, they're starting to have tarpon survive the winters. And so now there's, those are going to become important juvenile tarpon habitat locations.
Yep.
But yeah, they're not being considered in any of that. And a bigger challenge within all of what we're talking about so far is marine fisheries management is based on stock assessments, right? How many fish do you think they're in the water? What the age structure is? How many reproduce? How many can be harvested? They do not consider in fisheries management habitat, water quality. Every fisheries management agency has divisions that deal with fish biology and fish habitats, those types of things. But that information is not part of managing the fishery, right? It's all based on stock assessment. But which is like a 120-year-old model that worked for a while, but once we started to impact the habitats that support the fisheries,
right.
Those mathematical stock assessment models are no longer sufficient. And I think most people in the fish management world would agree with that statement.
Yeah.
Some won't. But that's another thing that we need to do is we need to change how we manage our fisheries to adjust to the challenges the modern world has put on us. Because you can manage to your heart's content, but if the fish lose sufficient amounts of habitat or have bad water quality that affects survival, you're not going to have a sustainable population. So I'll give you one example. In the Indian River Lagoon, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission recently made redfish catch and release only. And it wasn't because of overharvest. That wasn't a problem. And it was large majority of anglers supported that decision. There are fewer redfish because of habitat and water quality issues are so severe that redfish population has been depressed for quite some time. So
that's the root cause of it is
yeah,
the water quality.
Habitat and water quality. Yeah. But the way fisheries are managed, the state their only real response was to make it catch and release so that there was zero harvest, rather than, for example, say, okay, mandate that this type of restoration for water quality has to happen, or this type of habitat restoration has to happen, because a different agency deals with those things. Different agency in the Fisheries Management Agency. So yeah, there's a disconnect, and it's a system that's based on a world that hasn't existed, quite frankly, for a very long time.
Yeah. But
kind of like with the threshold effect that I talked about earlier, we're seeing the impacts now of what people did before us, decades ago. So the world that we're managing, or saying we're managing, has changed long ago, and we're still not up to speed on adjusting to that. And then you throw climate change on top of that, and like you said, fish are shifting north, and agencies just don't have. Fisheries management in general doesn't tend to be proactive. I would say actually resource management in general is generally not proactive, it's reactive.
Right.
So that just makes it even more of a challenge.
And what is as anyone listening, or as an angler who wants more, I don't know what the right word is, but more robust fisheries management to consider things like water quality or climate change. I mean, how do we change that? I mean, where do you go to say, hey, like, look, we got to do something about this?
Well, I mean, the fisheries management agencies are the ones, and other resource management agencies, like in Florida, the FWC, and then DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. And then we have some water management districts as well. They all have to get involved. And there's more of that type of action starting, but there needs to be a lot more integration. So it's a system change, right? It's a paradigm shift. And these are big entities that have been doing the same things the same way for generations.
Yeah.
And so change is always hard. the problem is that the rate of change of the environment we're trying to manage has increased greatly. So we don't really have time for like incremental adjustments. We've got to figure something out.
Yeah.
That said, there's no place you can really go and see an integration of habitat, water quality, and fisheries stock assessment management.
Just doesn't
Right? So
exist.
not to my knowledge.
Yeah.
That's how they managed a lot in the terrestrial world for ages. So I think we can learn a lot from that realm. But there's also a lot of politics pushing against that. So I think that by and large, the people in the management agencies understand everything we're talking about, and most of them would agree. But I think they probably need some political cover to do a lot of it. And that political cover comes from anglers contacting their politicians and those same agencies to give them support. But basically, saying, yeah, you guys need to do something and do it well and do it quickly.
Right.
To provide that type of push that gives those management agencies the ability to actually do that change.
Yep.
Right. So it's a squeaky wheel. And I would, if your audience is like, say, the typical fishing club that I go to, when people ask about, well, what can we do? And I say, you can call your politicians, write your politicians, you have your fishing club write op-eds in the local newspapers, all that type of stuff. And I ask how many people in the room have done any of those things. Right. And it's an extremely small number.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like we're our own worst enemy. And it's not fun. It's not pleasant. Hell, it's not even rewarding.
Right.
There's no instant gratification.
Yeah.
But this isn't a short game. It's long-term investment type of thing. So that's how people can, people want to go out and, maybe, plant an oyster reef, and that's, certainly helpful, but it's not going to fix anything.
Yeah.
What the real hard work is the political realm. That's just the way it is.
So everyone listening, we need to have some sort of coordinated effort to be pushing for these things. So maybe we'll have more of a follow-up on that, or maybe some sort of template or a letter or something that you can fill in the blanks. I think maybe that could be helpful. I'm going to write a letter now to op-ed.
Yeah. Also letting the companies in the fishing world know that this is important.
Yeah.
As we talked about, the response to things like addressing climate change at this year's ICAST were very different than at previous, right? Because people are starting to see the writing on the wall. But those companies have a lot of influence in the political realm.
Yeah.
If the people who are buying their gear tell them that this is so important that they'll go to another company to buy gear, that is huge as well. Well, there's a few companies that already do that, but most don't.
Yeah, and I think to your point, we were kind of talking about like action, right? What can I do as an angler? What can I do as a business? And that's obviously where I live in, helping businesses measure and reduce their carbon footprint. But that's something, if you're in the fishing industry, and I was pleasantly shocked for the first time that I didn't get laughed out of the booth when I was talking about, hey, what's your carbon footprint? And a lot of these companies were not only open to it, but were very receptive, and they wanted more information, which is good. But to your point, I think I think that the anglers need to say, hey, what's your stance on these things? And to your point, I'll go somewhere. I'll give someone else my business, right? So supporting brands that align with your values. If you're in the fishing industry or any other business, now would be a good time to go ahead and start reducing your carbon footprint, as it's going in the wrong direction. And then collectively using the individual and the business political power to change and affect policy and system change. So it's kind of its own system, right? The angler supports the businesses that align with their values. The businesses who do these right things and communicate it well will gain new customers, and then they can collectively go and make political change because they have the I don't know what the right word is, but the clout to do it.
Right.
And I mean, to me, I think that's sort of the winning strategy, or at least the only one that exists today that could work, So that gives me a little bit of hope, right? This is, to your point, look in the mirror, right? And what have you done? And I'm asking myself that, like, what have I done lately? And I could certainly be writing more op-eds and doing my share of the work to affect change. But I'm curious, with all of it just seems like things are moving in the wrong direction in a lot of ways. But is there anything that gives you hope as an angler or scientist, or what is there a message we could leave with folks out there on a positive note?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm still here. I'm still working on this stuff.
Right.
Right. Well, I mean, I have to be an optimist. I'm a fly fisherman. I tie a bunch of feathers on a hook, go out in the ocean, which is the large portion of the Earth's surface, and expect fish I want to catch to come within 100 feet of the boat, and then expect me to be able to reach that fish on a cast and throw a bunch of trap on a hook, as my friend says, and actually have the fish think it's something to eat and eat it. And then, through all the fight, land the fish.
Right.
So I've got to be an optimist.
Yeah.
Right? I've been working on this for over 30 years. And I'm still here. Yeah, there are days that are tough for sure. But I mean, the good thing is it's not like we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we don't have the information to let us know. We have the information on how to fix it.
Yeah.
We have all those things, right? So it's not like you show up at their doctor with some unknown disease that nobody knows what it is and it can't be cured.
Mm-hmm.
We have all that. We know the disease. We know the cure. And so we've got, I mean, in my mind, that's a lot of power. It's just getting people to apply that power,
mm-hmm.
realizing that they have the power. And, on top of that, I don't have any kids. But a lot of people do. And at this point, this isn't for me, for my timeline. This is for the generations that come after us.
Right.
And so I think there should be a huge sense of responsibility in that light. And I think those are all positive things because, we have the answer. It's just how are we going to actually apply it, or if we're going to apply it.
Yeah.
And as anglers, to an extent, we're the canary in the coal mine with some of this. Some of it's so obvious now everybody sees it. But as anglers, we see what's coming before most people do.
Yep.
And we can do a better job of communicating that for sure with other anglers, but also with people who don't fish. Just becoming more active. Yeah.
Well, I think that's awesome. And Aaron, I can't thank you enough for your time and sharing your knowledge with us today. Where can folks go if they want to support, which I would highly encourage anyone listening to this podcast to do? Where can people go and make a donation or support Bonefish and Tarpon Trust?
Well, they go to our website, bonefishtarpontrust.org. For sure. They can see about a lot of the research that we've been doing. They follow our social media feed. We're on Facebook and Instagram as well. They'll see some reports on research or other types of things that we've talked about today. I'm also involved with American Fly Fishing Trade Association on their work on climate and habitat. So they can go to the AFTA website and dig into that a bit as well. And there's some ways that they can get some talking points for reaching out to, the companies in our fishing industry to make sure that they're doing as much as they can as well. So those are two good starts. For on the fishing side, and then just keep digging to get information, and just keep pushing.
Well, I think I'm gonna we'll talk about this when we wrap, but I think we need to put like some sort of template letter for folks to start getting engaged. So we'll talk more about that. But But anyway, Aaron, thanks again for your time. Always great to talk with you. And yeah, we'll wrap there. Thanks again for listening to The Sustainable Angler, and special thanks to Dr. Aaron Adams for sharing his knowledge with us today on the show. If you like what you're hearing, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, and you can find previous episodes at www.thesustainableangler.com. Thanks.